All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. This is DeathGroundReviews. I'm here again with Rami Ungar, the horror writer.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. Looking forward to discussing some good horror.
Absolutely. So today, the movie is In the Mouth of Madness. So this came out back in 1995. February 3rd was the American release date. I think it was a few months earlier. It was released in the UK. And
Guess
this,
how old I was when that movie came out?
no heavens, you were like, what, 5, 4?
Nope, I haven't even turned 2 yet.
You hadn't even turned 2 yet. I was 8 years old when this movie
Oh
came out.
my, do you? Oh my God, you
I
are
have no
old.
memory of it. I don't remember ever seeing previews or anything. In fact, when they released it there in February, that was on purpose because the studio didn't have faith in this movie. They were going to release
Yeah,
it earlier, and there was like, I don't know if this will work. Let's just dump it in February. But it was directed by John Carpenter. Some say this is like his last decent movie. I haven't
I
seen.
don't know about that because
Okay.
I've heard a lot of good stuff about some of his later work, particularly the some stuff he did with the Master of Horror TV series or whatever it is.
Oh,
I
okay.
do know that this is the last entry in what's known as his Apocalypse trilogy. It's like the
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you heard of that?
I have vaguely heard something about that. Yeah. Weren't there a
Yeah, it's
couple of
basic.
movies in it?
Yeah, there are three movies. Obviously, it's a trilogy, and they're basically three films of Carpenter. No association between the three beyond the fact that they all involve the end of the world or the end of humanity in some way. I mean, first we have 1983's The Thing.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, that's the first one and the most well known, probably his most famous work besides Halloween.
Exactly.
And yeah, and where the apocalypse comes in the form of the thing or the organism that just integrates and mutates everything.
Yeah.
Then in 1987, we have Prince of Darkness, which we've talked about here before.
Right.
And that's a sort of science horror as well, but it deals a lot with religious horror as well. So we have Satan and the anti-god trying to free themselves and take over the earth. And then we have 1995's most Lovecraftian in and
Oh,
most supernatural entry, the In the Mouth of Madness.
right. That's you. Yep. You enumerated all of them. Nicely done. Um, yeah.
What can
So
I
the book
say?
is
I like Prince of Darkness, and I feel like that's my favorite, one of my favorite horror films, and I feel like it's the least well known of the trilogy.
it is an excellent horror film. So the
Thank
budget
you.
of this one was 8 million, and it did make a slight profit. It looks like it made like 8.9 million. But it was kind of totally ignored by most critics as well.
Well, I feel like January and February are the seasons when in or especially January, it's the time of the year when most studios put out the horror films that they feel like aren't gonna be big successes. So like Megan, that could have gone either way. The
Uh-huh.
and that's become a viral sensation. Also, Skinamarink, I don't know if you've heard of that.
Have not.
It's this experimental Canadian horror film that came out last month. I and it it was awful. I did not like it, but it's a polarizing film. It's a shot very weird, and it's like I said, it's experimental. If you ever find it on your streaming service, give it a watch and see what I mean. You might
Okay.
like it, you might hate it, but Either way, yeah,
It,
it's
it'll
kind of the
be
season.
an interesting experience nonetheless. So
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I feel like for horror films, January and February has been traditionally seen as like a dumping ground for the less big franchising films or those that aren't starting to get make back their budget. But at the same time, it's also becoming the season where more experimental or films that are more chancy are coming out. I mean, we got
yeah,
Cabin in the Woods coming out next month. That looks really good, as well as Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey.
interesting. Some
And that
stuff to keep in mind for future discussion. Then.
exactly. But yeah, then even if In the Mouth of Madness only made a slight profit, probably didn't even make back its budget plus marketing budget. It's gone on to have its own cult following. When I posted
Oh yeah,
about watching it in one of my Facebook groups, everyone just started freaking out. I mean, it's a group of about a
really.
thousand people, thousand movie fans of every stripe. But they started getting really excited. They were like, "Oh my god, I love this film! It's so much fun!
Wow.
It's kind of silly, but also has such great ideas."
Huh. I'm surprised you had that many responses. That's cool. You know,
It might be a
that's
slight exaggeration, but you get it. It is.
well, I mean, even the YouTube comments, that I was looking at, there were quite a bit there. I had a few thousand likes just on there. I kept seeing the comment of "give the guy a raise that chose to put this on here." So it
So
does
should
have
we?
that cult following.
Yeah, it does, and we should really tell the folks at home what this movie's about. Because if they don't know it, they're just like, "Okay, you're talking about it, you're
Yeah,
loving it, but what is it about?"
I
So
got it. I got a synopsis right here. So, when horror novelist Sutter Kane, played by Jurgen Prochnow, I mispronounced that, forgive me,
you're
goes
good.
missing, insurance investigator John Trent, played by the great Sam Neill, scrutinizes the claim made by his publisher, Jackson Harglow, played by Charleston Heston, and endeavors to retrieve a yet to be released manuscript and ascertain the writer's whereabouts. Accompanied by the novelist is editor Linda Stiles, played by Julie Carmen, and distributed by Nightmares from reading Kane's other novels, Trent makes an eerie nightmare trek to the supernatural town in New Hampshire, Hobbs End.
Yeah, and can I just say I really wish Sutter Kane books were real because they look so good.
Interesting fact,
Also,
Rami.
do you read Sutter Kane?
I would be reading. Uh, Interesting thing I want to ask you. So there's that scene where John, Trent, and Linda are walking towards the church, and John's reading from
Mhm.
one of Sutter Kane's books because they're trying to find details about that church and what had been there. That is actually quoted directly from an H.P. Lovecraft story, and I was curious if you might have recognized what H.P. Lovecraft story that's quoted from.
I want to say though, uh, not the Whisperer of the Darkness or the thing on the doorstep. It's the one with the three-eyed monster in it. What's
Okay.
it? I mean, that's the only one I can think of that involves a church.
Right.
If you give me a second, I gotta Google it. Hold on. H.P. Lovecraft bibliography. This is gonna bug me if unless I figure it out.
So it was Michael De Luca. He's the one that wrote the script for In the Mouth of Madness. He's also the guy that wrote the final vision, the final nightmare in Freddy Krueger's Nightmare on Elm Street, which is
That's
considered
one
one
I
of
haven't seen.
yeah, that's considered one of the least liked nightmare sequences too. But he,
Mm.
he banged this script out for In the Mouth of Madness in 3 weeks.
Uh, 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 that's impressive. It usually takes me a bit longer to do a full length feature work. Oh, and the guy and the story was probably The Haunter in the Dark because
Haunter in the Dark. Okay.
that's the only one I know of that involves a church.
So, so what did I have this idea that came to my mind this movie was 90 minutes long. You know, there's
Mhm.
the premise is easily understandable. There are perhaps some holes that develop in the plot and the unfolding of the story. I almost felt like maybe if it had been like a mini series, they could have expounded so many cool things. Like we could have learned so much more about Sutter Kane, a little bit more about his backstory. We could have learned more about like was he just possessed by these monsters and now he's like their puppet undergoing like almost a Stockholm syndrome in a sense, or did he conjure them and desire them from the beginning? You know, there's so many interesting questions that came to my mind.
You know, you do have a point. That does sound like an interesting idea. I think if a miniseries or even a novelization would probably go into those questions a bit morely,
Yeah,
but at the same time, we if they did, we would not have gotten the experience, the wild, wacky ride that is this movie. I mean, oh my God, from the weird rock and roll opening where you watch the covers of one of Kane's novels, Hobbs and
yeah,
Orr.
all of them. Yeah. What did you think of the rock? So most of the movie had like that orchestral sound, but then you had that cool rock and roll guitar. Did you find that out of place or did it work for you?
I totally forgot that was a thing until I rewatched the movie. And honestly, I just feel like it was a weird choice. I mean,
It was kind of weird.
I could understand showing the printing of the jackets for Sutter Kane's new book, Hob and Tor, but I mean, I would have gone with a creepier score
Hmm.
or like maybe show someone in the printing in
Yeah.
place reading the book and just suddenly going a little crazy
See,
because that's what
I thought it worked in the ending when Sam Neill's character's laughing and madly in the theater. Like I thought the rock sound worked there, but I agree with you in the beginning. It did fill out of place in the opening credits. I felt like it should have been something more orchestral and spookier and yeah.
well, the 90s were a weird time for horror. I mean, it is the decade that gave us Scream, and that was is mostly a deconstruction of older horror films, especially from the slasher
Yes.
genre.
That's true. The 90s was a weird barren place for horror movies, wasn't it?
90s to early 2000s. I mean, up until you got films like 1408 and in
Right.
Paranormal Activity, that there were very few good horror films. It just kind of went stagnant. I think, the biggest horror film from that era that wasn't a sequel or a slasher of some sort, or a metatextual deconstructive slasher was Blair Witch Project.
Some other thoughts came to my mind about the plot. Like, did it seem like John Trent's character was being influenced from the very beginning, or was it more when he began his journey to Hobbs End, or when he started reading Sutter Kane's books, or was he always influenced the whole time?
I don't even know if John Trent is even a real person. I mean, think
Yeah,
about it. First off, that name sounds like something you would name a book character.
yeah,
And if the Sutter Kane created all these different characters, he created an entire town just from his imagination,
right.
and and the and manipulated everyone in it. It it to the point where people were killing themselves. It's because he wrote it that way.
Right.
So I'm not convinced that there was ever a John Trent until, well, he manifested in New York City in that very warm office during that insurance meeting at the beginning of the film. I think that was his birthday, and then when we see him at the end of the film, having just escaped from an insane asylum,
Right.
and sitting in a movie theater, he's like what, maybe 5 weeks old at most.
So Sutter Kane's just the god of this whole world, and he's just another character. He's conjured out of his writing. Wow.
Yeah, he or
From the beginning.
he's a powerful sorcerer who uses the written word to do his spells. That I mean, what is a novel? What is literature but magic? Every time we write a story, it gets into people. They see things that aren't there. They come to believe in them in a sense, especially the more popular stories. How many people will have been influenced by the works of King or H.P. Lovecraft or Anne Rice? Just
Yeah.
you keep so Sutter Kane only took his magic a bit further. I think what happened was that those entities saw his talent, chose him, started subtly influencing him, giving him power so that he could affect reality, and and, and his story started getting into people's heads, becoming eventually more popular than the Bible, at least in the world of the movie, and that
Right. That's what Sutter Kane says. Yeah.
it's been known for ages that our perceptions and our thoughts can change reality. Maybe not on the individual level, but it's on the group level. So there's a whole physics argument about that I'm not going to go into because I barely understand it myself. I just understand the basic summary. But it wouldn't surprise me if all the magic was enough to make people not only believe in his word, but to basically mentally project his world into ours. And that's how we got Hobbs End. That's how we got John Trent. That's how we got what Linda Stiles and Hobbs End and all the other stuff. And that's what allowed these monsters to get through.
It makes me think too of Sam Neill's performance. I think like he was the main thing that held this movie together because you
Yeah.
have him holding to that skepticism almost clear to the near end, and that's like the main conflict going on with him is his unwillingness to accept this unraveling of reality and this new reality that's overshadowing it and taking over. And I felt like the way he performed that, holding on to that skepticism and that conflict, really made this movie work.
Yeah. Not to say it isn't perfect.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
we were
Oh
discussing this before we started. The whole scene where Senator Kane's like, "My favorite color is blue," and then
yeah.
everything is blue.
And he
Or
screams like in madness. Ah! It was a very
or
random moment, kind of jarring. Yeah.
and then there was the moment where he's sitting in Charlton Heston's office and he's like, "You gotta stop In the Mouth of Madness. You can't let it get published ever." And then he's like, "Oh, but you delivered the manuscript like 7 weeks, like months
Yeah.
ago. It's been
Yeah.
out on the on the streets for like 7 weeks now. It's a bit too far for that." And I'm like, "Then what the hell did we just watch?" I mean, we just
That's what I
went
thought. Yeah.
we
That's what
just
made me start
watched him going
questioning.
to find Sutter Kane and the manuscript. Then what the there's a time travel paradox right there, and I want
Yeah.
to know
Yeah.
what the hell is going on.
That was the key moment that made me start questioning a lot of different things. I want to shift gears a little bit to special effects. What I loved though about some of these older movies is they used so many great practical effects. You had these
I
puppets that were made
know.
highly detailed, but when they used CGI, they used it with precision in the right moments, like when the car's traveling and it looks like it's hanging over the clouds in the huge sky. That's a CGI moment. When Sutter Kane rips away his face like he's made of paper, that's CGI. They use it with such precision in the
Yeah,
right.
back in the that's what I love. And that's what a lot of horror fans are and horror creators are going back to. The whole
Yeah.
overuse of CGI became much more of a thing in the late 90s, early 2000s. You'll see a lot of horror movies that involve the supernatural from that period overusing CGI, and obviously it's not very scary. It's just kind of aged poorly. It was bad even then. Uh, Back then they knew what the practical effects were practical. They had to use them, but they knew how to use them.
Yes.
And when CGI became a thing, they knew where to go, where to use it, and where not to use it. Otherwise, it would just uh, ruin the movie. And you see a lot of horror films today, especially those that involve monsters, trying to go back to that when they can. Like The Color Out of Space from about 3 years ago. Oh, yes, there's CGI, but they try and use practical effects as much as possible. Will will reel the thing and months in the Mouth of Madness style those special effects and uh or practical effects and animatronics, and it works. It is terrifying. And
Yeah.
if you haven't seen that, that's another film you got to watch and then discuss on this show.
Absolutely. It just seems like, yeah, they got overexcited. They went, oh, we got this CGI. Else can we do with it? And sometimes when you get a new toy that's working right, you start to play with it too much. Maybe that's just what happened during that period.
Unfortunately, and I feel like that's a loss because I personally I don't really care for CGI that much. And I rarely watch 3D animated films
Right.
because, well, one thing, they're mostly made for children, but it also because I like 2D animation. I grew up with that for the most part, watching 2D animated Disney films and other studios. I prefer that. And anime, even with the use of computers now, still for the most part sticks to a 2D animation style, and it's for the better if you ask me. There are a lot. So I feel like we could learn to cut out CGI and make better movies that way.
Yeah, I
But then
think,
again, I'm not in Hollywood. They haven't invited me yet. So maybe they'll invite us someday when they decide to make our stories into movies. We can hope, right?
we can definitely hope, and yeah, as if when it's used as an enhancement tool, I think it works fine. But yeah, the overuse of it is a problem. I wanted to ask you, Rami, tell me all of the H.P. Lovecraft references you saw in this movie, because I'm sure you spotted most of them. I remember Mrs. Pickman from Pickman's Model.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
creepy
Um,
character, disturbing character in the movie.
and she might also be a reference to Keziah Mason from Dreams in the Witch House.
Oh, okay.
Which because she's an because Keziah Mason is a dangerous old lady that she's actually a witch that was supposedly burned at the stake or something, and now he lives in an alternate dimension and sacrifices to Nyarlathotep. Yep. So Mrs. Pigman could also be a reference to that.
Right.
Definitely one of those monsters that we saw was a reference to Cthulhu. It had the head, the
Absolutely.
eyes, the tentacles. Okay, what Haunter? The Haunter in the Dark we mentioned. That's
Where John
the
Trent's reading a passage from it when they're
yeah,
walking towards the church.
and the church itself. I mean, if you're
Yeah,
gonna,
church
because
itself. Sure.
that whole scene, every scene within the church was probably a reference. Those dogs, it's been a while, so I can't be sure, but it might be a reference to The Hound by H.P. Lovecraft, one of his earlier works.
Uh-huh.
What else? He didn't write a lot of stories about fiction becoming reality. At least not that I remember. But books that can cause madness or that's definitely the Necronomicon right there.
Yeah.
Because
It's a
I mean, even
foundational reference there.
yeah, it's probably other also the whole New England setting. I mean, it takes place in New Hampshire, or for the most part, and New Hampshire is part of Lovecraft's New England. And I believe the story, The Whisper in the Dark, takes place in New Hampshire or Vermont, one of them. And I'm pretty sure that one of the Sutter Kane novels had the name The Whisperer in its title, the word The Whisperer in its title.
You're
That,
right. It did. It did.
that's another thing. I want to know what the names of all these books, all
You
these
can
Sutter
look them
Kane.
up. I think you can look up pictures of them. Oh yeah.
I know there's Hobbs and Horror, which sounds like the Dunwich Horror, and In the Mouth of Madness is At the Mountain of Madness.
Yeah.
There's one called The Feeding. I remember that, but I don't know what that's a reference to. Ooh.
I want to say though, I loved just the eerie quality of the Hobbs End town because it looks so pristine and beautiful still, but it's empty when they come in. That's such a haunting moment in the movie.
Found him.
You found
Found
him?
the titles. The Thing in the Basement, The Breathing Tunnel, Haunted Out of Time, The Feeding, Whisper in the Dark, Hobbs and Horror, in the Mouth of Madness. And I can name you for the most part, I can name what the reference is. The Thing in the Basement is a reference to the Thing on the Doorstep. Haunted Out of Time is the Shadow Out of Time. Whisper in Dark is the Whisperer in Darkness. Hobbs and Horror, Dunwich Horror, In the Mouth of Madness is At the Mountain of Madness. I think the Breathing Tunnel might be a reference to Stephen King's The Breathing Method.
Maybe. Hobbs End. Didn't King have a story, something like Crouch End? He had a story called Crouch End that was Lovecraft.
Yes.
There
Crouch
we go.
End. It features another H.P. Lovecraft creation, Shub-Niggurath.
Awesome.
Funnily enough, just this past weekend, I finished editing a story in my upcoming collection in Hannah and Other Stories that features Shub-Niggurath.
Well,
cool. I make a lot of mentions, a lot of references to various H.P. Lovecraft stories as well, including the Dunwich Horror and Dreams in the Witch House.
You're quite a Lovecraft fan, Rami. I'm surprised you spotted all those.
I'm sure there are more I missed.
Oh yeah, they're probably everywhere in there. A rewatchable movie where you can, dig up little plot things and other references. But yeah, we're running out of time here. But yeah, guys, that was In the Mouth of Madness that we've discussed, starring Sam Neill, directed by John Carpenter. Some consider it his last decent film. Give it a watch and let us know what you guys think. You guys think that it's as great of a movie as we do. So,
and whatever you do, if you read any Sutter Kane, don't go crazy or start changing on us.
I hope we're not the ones that are the inception of all that. Well, great.
Oh no.
Hopefully
what have we done?
But anyway, yeah, this is DeathGroundReviews with Rami Ungar, the horror writer.
See you all and pleasant nightmares.
See you guys.